The moment our landing module touched down in the Valles Marineris Canyon, every instrument on our ship began registering impossible readings that suggested we had not merely landed on Mars, but had somehow triggered the awakening of something vast and ancient that had been slumbering beneath the red planet's surface for millions of years. Within hours, a translucent dome of energy had materialized around our landing site, invisible to the naked eye, but utterly impermeable to our escape pods and communication signals, while geometric structures began rising from the Martian soil, with the slow inevitability of mountains being born. And as we watched in growing horror through our habitat windows, we realized that these towering spires were not buildings or monuments, but sensory organs belonging to a planetary defense system that had identified humanity as a threat to be contained, studied, and ultimately disposed of according to protocols established by intelligences so alien that their very logic was toxic to human reason. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Christ, I'm still shaking as I record this into the emergency beacon's black box, hoping someone back on Earth will find this transmission buried in the static someday. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hartwell, formerly of the Houston Space Center, though I suppose formerly is optimistic considering none of us are ever getting home. 3 days ago, we were heroes. The Olympus crew, myself, Dr. Benjamin Cross from MIT's Xenogeology Department, and Captain Viktor Kozlov, the toughest son of a bitch the Russian space program ever produced. We just completed humanity's first successful manned landing on Mars, and the champagne was supposed to be waiting for us back on the orbital station. Instead, we're trapped in what I can only describe as a fishbowl designed by something that views humans the way we view bacteria. The thing is, Ben's equipment started malfunctioning the second our boots hit Martian soil. Not the usual solar panel dust accumulation or temperature differential bullshit we'd trained for. No, his seismic readers were picking up geometric vibrations from deep underground, patterns so mathematically perfect they made his computer crash trying to process them. Victor thought it was interference from our reactor, but I knew better. I'd felt something similar once before during a classified mining operation in the Atacama Desert, where we'd accidentally drilled into a pocket of crystallized mineral formations that sang when the wind hit them just right. Except Mars doesn't have wind strong enough to make anything sing. The first time I saw one of those spires pushing through the canyon floor, I thought my mind was cracking from the isolation. Victor was outside adjusting our communications array when the ground beneath his feet began to shift. Not like an earthquake, but like something massive was stretching after a very long sleep. The spire emerged smooth as glass, nearly 40 feet tall, covered in flowing patterns that hurt to look at directly. That's when our radio signals stopped reaching the orbital station. That's when the invisible barrier formed around our landing site, trapping us with whatever we'd awakened. And that's when I realized our mission briefing had been missing some very crucial information about what previous Mars expeditions had actually discovered down here. Victor was still outside when the second spire erupted 30 meters from our habitat module. The Russian barely had time to dive behind our water reclamation tank before the ground split open like a flower made of rust and stone. What emerged wasn't just another tower. It was architectural impossibility, a structure that seemed to bend space around itself until my eyes watered trying to track its angles. "Jackson, get me a visual on Victor's position," Ben called from the navigation console, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that flickered with interference. "These readings are completely fucked. My instruments are showing mass displacement in 6 different dimensions." I pressed my face to the reinforced aluminum window, watching Victor crouch behind our equipment. The man looked small against the backdrop of alien geometry rising from Martian soil. Our habitat, a marvel of engineering that had taken NASA 15 years to perfect, suddenly felt like a tin can someone had dropped on an ocean floor. "Victor, can you hear me?" I spoke into the comm unit, but static answered back, the same dead white noise that had replaced our orbital communications 12 hours ago. Ben twisted in his chair, sweat beading on his forehead despite the habitat's climate control. "The electromagnetic signature from these spires is unlike anything in our databases. They're generating a field that's interfering with quantum entanglement in our communication arrays. English, Doc. We're being jammed by technology that operates on principles we don't understand." Victor appeared at our external airlock 40 minutes later, his environmental suit covered in fine red dust that seemed to move independently of Martian wind patterns. When the pressurization cycle completed and he pulled off his helmet, his usually stoic expression had cracked around the edges. "There are more," he said, accepting the water tube I offered. "7 spires visible from the ridge, maybe 10. They are growing." He paused, his thick accent making the words sound heavier. "No, not growing, extending, like fingers pushing through soil." Ben leaned forward from his workstation. "Did you get close enough to take readings?" Close enough. Victor's grey eyes fixed on something past our shoulders. "Ben, your instruments detect crystal formations, yes?" "Crystalline matrices, yeah, why?" "Because these spires, they sing." The word hit our pressurized cabin like a physical thing. I'd mentioned the singing crystals in Chile briefly during pre-flight, but never elaborated on what we'd found down there, what we'd been ordered never to discuss. "Describe the sound," I said. Victor's jaw worked silently for several seconds, like whales calling through water, but mathematical. Each note follows patterns that hurt to hear. Ben's fingers had gone still on his keyboard. "That's impossible. Sound requires atmospheric density that Mars doesn't possess." "Many things today are impossible." Victor began stripping out of his environmental suit with methodical precision. "Yet here we sit, trapped by invisible walls and watched by towers that should not exist." I walked to our main communications array, a sophisticated piece of hardware that normally kept us connected to Earth with less than a 4-minute delay. Now it displayed nothing but scrolling error messages in 12 different languages. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd traveled 300 million kilometers to make first contact, only to discover we weren't the ones initiating it. "Ben, pull up the geological surveys from the Soviet Mars program," I said. "The classified ones." "Jackson, those files are..." "Above your clearance level, I know. Mine too, officially." I retrieved my emergency command codes from the sealed packet in my personal effects. But desperate times call for creative interpretation of protocol. The files took 20 minutes to decrypt, during which Victor cleaned his equipment with obsessive care and Ben muttered increasingly creative profanity at his malfunctioning instruments. When the data finally populated our screens, it painted a picture that made my stomach clench. Mars had been surveyed extensively by unmanned Soviet probes between 1962 and 1988. Most missions had failed due to technical difficulties or communication errors, but 3 had transmitted geological data before going silent. Data showing massive underground structures in the Valles Marineris region, geometric formations that extended kilometers beneath the surface. "Son of a bitch," Ben whispered, reading over my shoulder. They knew. The Soviets knew there was something down here. Not just the Soviets. I pulled up another file, this one stamped with NASA's highest classification levels. "We've been monitoring subsurface temperature variations in this region since 1998. The thermal signatures suggested dormant machinery." Victor joined us at the console, his expression grim. "So we did not accidentally trigger anything. We came here knowing we would wake something up." "That's the working theory," I admitted. "The question is whether our mission briefing was sanitized to protect us from foreknowledge that might have compromised the mission, or to protect whoever sent us here from liability when things went wrong." A low harmonic vibration traveled through the habitat's floor plating, so deep I felt it in my bones rather than heard it. Victor's singing spires had begun a new song, and the frequency made our dental fillings ache. Ben's instruments registered the sound as a coherent signal being broadcast at specific intervals. Mathematical progressions that followed patterns found in quantum mechanics and stellar cartography. Whatever intelligence controlled the spires was attempting communication. "We need to respond," Ben said, "if they're trying to establish contact." "Contact?" Victor's laugh held no humor. "Look at our situation, Dr. Cross. We are specimens in a laboratory. The question is not how to communicate with our captors. The question is what they plan to do with us once their observations are complete." The vibration intensified and hairline cracks appeared in our forward viewing port. The hairline cracks in our viewing port spread like frost across glass, accompanied by a sound that reminded me uncomfortably of my grandfather's arthritic knuckles popping. Victor was already suiting up before I'd finished calculating atmospheric pressure differentials. "We cannot remain inside," he said, checking his environmental seals with practiced efficiency. "Habitat integrity compromised means slow death by asphyxiation. Quick death outside means we control timing." Ben looked up from his instruments, face pale under the artificial lighting. "The harmonic frequency is increasing. Whatever's generating these vibrations is ramping up to something bigger." I studied the structural damage spreading across our forward section. The cracks followed geometric patterns that matched the spire configurations outside, too precise to be coincidental. "Victor's right. We need to relocate before this place becomes our tomb." "Relocate where?" Ben gestured at the desolate landscape visible through our compromised windows. "We're surrounded by alien architecture that defies physics, trapped under an invisible dome, and our emergency shelter won't survive another night in sub-zero temperatures." "The thermal readings suggest underground installations," I said, pulling up the geological data on our portable display unit. "If we can access whatever infrastructure exists beneath these spires, we might find environments designed for long-term habitation." Victor finished his equipment check and turned toward us. "Jackson, you mentioned Chile earlier. The crystalline formations you discovered there, were they artificial?" The question hung in our recycled air like smoke. I'd spent 6 years avoiding direct answers about the Atacama incident, but current circumstances had rendered operational security somewhat irrelevant. "Define artificial," I said. "The crystal matrices we found were geometrically perfect, organized in patterns that suggested deliberate construction. But the mineral composition was consistent with natural formation processes that should have taken millennia." "Should have?" "Except our radiometric dating indicated they'd formed over approximately 18 months. Ben's hands had frozen above his keyboard. 18 months, that's impossible without massive energy input. What kind of energy source could... Unknown." I began gathering essential equipment from our storage lockers. What we did know was that the formations responded to electromagnetic stimulation by generating coherent energy fields that could manipulate local gravitational constants within a limited radius. Victor's expression had gone carefully neutral, the way it did when he suspected information was being withheld. "And now we find similar formations on Mars, except these respond to our presence without any electromagnetic stimulation. Which suggests they're considerably more sophisticated than what we found in Chile," I admitted. The harmonic vibrations intensified again, and this time the sound carried harmonics that bypassed our eardrums entirely, resonating through bone and brain tissue until our teeth ached. Ben doubled over his console, pressing palms against his temples. "Jesus Christ, it's like having someone drill directly into my skull," he gasped. I grabbed our emergency geological scanner and headed for the airlock. "We're leaving. Now, before whatever's generating these frequencies decides to increase the amplitude." Our evacuation took 37 minutes. 37 minutes during which the spires continued their mathematical song while more cracks spread through our habitat's superstructure. By the time we'd secured our portable equipment and sealed our environmental suits, the forward viewing port had developed a spider web of fractures that made the Martian landscape outside look like a shattered kaleidoscope. Victor led our small procession toward the nearest spire, his geological scanner sweeping the ground ahead for stable footing. The Martian soil beneath our boots felt different now, less like loose regolith and more like packed earth covering something solid. "Subsurface density readings are off the charts," Ben reported through our suit communications. "There's definitely infrastructure down there, extensive infrastructure." The spire we approached stood roughly 50 meters tall, its surface covered in flowing patterns that seemed to shift when observed directly. Up close, the structure appeared to be composed of some kind of crystalline material that generated its own internal illumination. Soft blue-white light pulsed along geometric channels carved into its surface, following mathematical progressions that hurt to contemplate. "It's beautiful," Ben whispered, and I realized he was right. The spire possessed an aesthetic quality that human minds recognized as intentional art, even though the intelligence behind its creation was utterly alien. Victor had circled to the structure's base where the crystalline material merged seamlessly with Martian rock. "Jackson, you need to see this." I joined him at the spire's foundation and immediately understood his concern. The boundary between alien construction and natural geology wasn't a clean interface. Instead, the crystalline material seemed to have grown through existing rock formations, incorporating Martian minerals into its structure while transforming their molecular composition into something entirely new. "How long do you think this took?" Ben asked, running his gloved hands along the hybrid stone crystal surface. "Based on the geological integration patterns? I studied the seamless merger of natural and artificial materials. Hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions." Victor's scanner beeped with proximity alerts. "There is an opening here, entrance to subsurface levels." The opening was barely visible, a circular depression in the spire's base that might have been natural erosion if not for the perfectly smooth walls that descended into blue-lit darkness. Our helmet lamps illuminated a spiral ramp carved from the same hybrid material, disappearing into depths our lights couldn't penetrate. "No fucking way," Ben said, backing away from the entrance. "We don't know what's down there. For all we know, this could be a digestive system designed to process organic matter. And staying on the surface guarantees slow death from exposure," Victor countered. "At least underground we might find answers." I checked our suit power levels and life support reserves. 6 hours of breathable atmosphere remained, maybe 8 if we managed our exertion carefully. Our habitat was compromised. Our orbital pickup wouldn't arrive for another 43 days. And the invisible barrier surrounding our landing site had proven impermeable to our escape pods. "We go down," I decided, "but we maintain constant communication and retreat at the first sign of active threat." The descent took longer than expected because the spiral ramp was sized for beings considerably larger than humans. Each step was nearly twice the comfortable stride length for someone in an environmental suit, forcing us to adopt an awkward climbing motion that quickly fatigued our leg muscles. The blue illumination grew stronger as we descended, emanating from channels carved into the walls that pulsed in rhythm with the harmonic frequencies above. Geometric patterns covered every surface, mathematical equations rendered in three-dimensional relief that seemed to describe relationships between space, time, and consciousness that human science had never contemplated. "These equations," Ben said, stopping to examine a particularly complex section of wall carving. "They're describing multi-dimensional topology, but the constants are all wrong for our universe." "Wrong how?" "The gravitational constant is listed as variable depending on local consciousness density. The speed of light fluctuates based on observer expectations. This isn't describing physical laws, it's describing a reality where consciousness directly influences fundamental forces." Victor had continued ahead while Ben and I studied the wall carvings. His voice crackled through our suit communications from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. "Jackson, Ben, you need to get down here immediately." We found him standing in a vast underground chamber illuminated by bioluminescent crystal formations that covered the walls like frozen lightning. But the crystals weren't what had stolen Victor's breath. The chamber contained machines, massive crystalline constructs that hummed with barely contained energy, their surfaces covered in the same flowing patterns we'd observed on the spires above, and surrounding the machines, embedded in crystal cocoons that preserved them in perfect detail, were the remains of previous visitors. Human remains, still wearing environmental suits bearing NASA insignia from missions that had supposedly never reached Mars. "Well," Victor said quietly, "now we know what happened to the missing expeditions." The silence in the crystal chamber stretched like a held breath. Ben had gone completely still beside me, his helmet lamp trained on the nearest cocoon where a preserved astronaut floated in translucent amber environmental suit intact, except for the feeding tubes that had grown through the chest plate like metallic vines. Victor moved between the preserved figures with the careful gait of someone walking through a cemetery. "Mission patches," he said, his voice hollow through our suit communications. "Ares 7, Ares 12, Phoenix Delta. Missions that were officially scrubbed due to budget constraints." "Bullshit," Ben whispered. "Those missions happened. They just never came home." I counted 17 cocoons arranged in a perfect spiral around the chamber's central machine, which hummed with the same mathematical harmonics we'd heard above ground. Each cocoon contained a human figure in various stages of what I could only describe as integration. Some still recognizably human, others transformed into hybrid creatures where flesh had merged with crystalline growths that pulsed with alien bioluminescence. Jackson. Victor had stopped in front of a cocoon marked with recent manufacturing dates on the environmental suit. This one is from the Meridian expedition, the mission that launched 6 months before ours. Captain Torres from the Meridian crew floated in his crystal prison, eyes open but no longer human. The irises had been replaced with faceted gems that reflected our helmet lamps in impossible angles, and when those geometric eyes tracked our movement through the chamber, I realized Torres was still conscious inside his transformation. Ben backed away from the cocoons, his breathing rapid enough to trigger his suit's hyperventilation warnings. We need to leave, now before whatever did this to them decides we're next. Leave for where? Victor asked. Surface temperatures will kill us in hours, our habitat is compromised, and we are trapped under an energy dome that prevents escape. So we just accept this, become part of their fucking collection. Victor's grey eyes studied the central machine, its crystalline architecture humming with barely contained energy. Perhaps we learn why they were preserved. Understanding their purpose might reveal survival strategies. Their purpose? Ben's voice cracked with strain. Look at them. They're specimens in some alien laboratory, being slowly converted into whatever these things consider an improvement on human biology. I approached the nearest cocoon, studying the feeding tubes that had grown through the astronaut's chest plate. The technology was elegant in its horror. The tubes provided life support while simultaneously introducing foreign materials that restructured human physiology from the inside out. The preservation wasn't about keeping them alive. It was about maintaining specimen integrity during a slow transformation process. The modifications follow patterns, I said, noting how each preserved figure showed progressive stages of crystalline integration. Early stages show mineral deposits in bone tissue. Later stages show complete replacement of nervous system components with crystalline matrices. The final stage appears to be consciousness transfer into the crystal network itself. Victor nodded grimly. Which explains why Captain Torres still tracks movement. His awareness has been preserved, but relocated into a distributed crystalline intelligence. Ben's helmet lamp swept across the chamber walls, illuminating carved equations that described the transformation process in mathematical detail. This is systematic biological research. They're studying human physiology by converting us into something compatible with their technology. The machines in the chamber began changing their harmonic frequency, and the cocoons responded by brightening their internal illumination. Whatever intelligence controlled this facility had noticed our presence and was adjusting its operations accordingly. Movement, Victor said, pointing toward the chamber's far wall, where another circular opening had begun dilating. Something approaches. What emerged from the opening wasn't immediately recognizable as having once been human. The figure moved with fluid grace despite biomechanical modifications that had replaced major skeletal components with articulated crystal structures. Its environmental suit had been integrated into its physiology, creating a hybrid being that could survive in Martian atmosphere without external life support. When it spoke, the voice came from multiple sources: throat, chest cavity, and harmonic resonance through crystal components that had replaced its skull. The words were English, but processed through alien vocal modifications that made them sound like music composed by a computer. Welcome to the preservation facility. I am Dr. Raymond Coon, formerly of the Phoenix Delta expedition. I have been selected to facilitate your integration into the collective consciousness. Ben's medical scanner was registering impossible readings from the transformed figure. Biological signs are completely abnormal. Neural activity is distributed across crystalline implants throughout the body. Jackson, that thing isn't human anymore. I remain functionally human, Dr. Coon replied, apparently capable of monitoring our suit communications. Enhanced, certainly. Optimized for long-term survival in environments hostile to baseline human physiology. The integration process preserves individual consciousness while providing access to expanded cognitive capabilities. Victor stepped forward, his geological scanner aimed at the transformed figure. What is the purpose of preservation? Why are humans being modified? Mars requires caretakers. The planetary defense system was designed to protect this world from contamination by incompatible life forms. However, analysis of human genetic material revealed potential for beneficial adaptation. Selected specimens are modified to serve as intermediaries between baseline humanity and the planetary consciousness. Selected how? I asked. Dr. Coon's crystalline eyes fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. Leadership qualities, adaptability under stress, and specific psychological profiles that indicate compatibility with distributed consciousness networks. You were chosen for integration before your mission launched, Lieutenant Colonel Hartwell. The words hit me like decompression sickness. Everything, our mission parameters, our landing coordinates, even our crew composition, had been predetermined by whatever intelligence controlled this facility. We hadn't accidentally triggered an alien defense system. We'd been deliberately led into a trap designed specifically for us. The mission briefings, I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. The classified Soviet data, the thermal signatures NASA had been monitoring. It was all preparation for targeted recruitment. Correct. Previous expeditions provided psychological profiles and genetic samples necessary to design optimal integration protocols for subsequent crews. Your arrival completes the data set required for large-scale human modification programs. Ben raised his emergency beacon, its red activation light blinking in the crystal chamber's blue illumination. Like hell it does. The beacon's distress signal lasted approximately 3 seconds before the chamber's machines responded with electromagnetic pulses that fried every piece of electronic equipment in our possession. Our suit systems switched to emergency backup power. Life support reduced to basic atmospheric recycling with maybe 2 hours of functionality remaining. Resistance is counterproductive, Dr. Coon observed. Integration preserves consciousness while providing enhanced survival capabilities. Refusal results in organic death and consciousness termination. Victor had been studying the chamber's crystal formations while Dr. Coon spoke. Now he turned toward me with an expression of grim determination. Jackson, the crystal matrices are connected to surface spires through conductive channels in the rock. The entire facility is one massive neural network. Meaning if we disrupt the network's foundation structure, we might be able to damage the preservation system before it can complete our integration. And kill everyone already in the system, Ben pointed out, including the crew members who might still be conscious inside those cocoons. Dr. Coon's modified features shifted into what might have been a smile. Disruption of the network would indeed terminate preserved consciousnesses. However, it would also prevent your own preservation, resulting in death by exposure within hours. I looked around the chamber at 17 cocoons containing astronauts who had trusted their governments and space agencies to bring them home safely. Men who had been led into an alien trap designed to convert them into something that served the interests of a planetary defense system that viewed humanity as an invasive species requiring management. The choice was simple and terrible. Accept transformation into something no longer human, or die as humans while potentially condemning 17 preserved consciousnesses to termination along with us. Victor was already moving toward the chamber's central machine, his remaining tools clutched in hands that had begun trembling from suit malfunction hypothermia. Some choices are easy to make. Dr. Coon stepped between Victor and the machine, and I saw for the first time that the modifications had granted him inhuman speed and strength. When he grabbed Victor's arm, the sound of metal stress fractures carried through our helmet communications. Victor, Ben lunged toward them, but stopped when Victor's scream of pain cut through the comm channel. Where Dr. Coon had gripped Victor's environmental suit, crystalline growths were spreading through the fabric and into Victor's arm beneath. The integration process had begun, triggered by direct contact with a fully transformed hybrid. Victor looked at me through his helmet visor, already pale with shock as alien technology invaded his bloodstream. Jackson, the machine. Destroy it before the network spreads to Earth. But I knew we were already too late. If this facility had been operating for decades, collecting and studying human crews, then somewhere in its vast crystalline memory banks was enough biological and psychological data to begin converting Earth's population into caretakers for an alien intelligence that had been patient enough to plan this operation across centuries. And I realized my greatest failure. I had led my crew directly into the trap because my psychological profile indicated I would make exactly the choices that had brought us here. Victor's arm had gone completely numb by the time we managed to drag him away from Dr. Coon and barricade ourselves behind a cluster of inactive machinery on the chamber's far side. The crystalline infection spread visibly beneath his suit's transparent aluminum panels, geometric patterns growing through muscle tissue like luminescent cancer. "How long?" Victor asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Ben checked his medical scanner's remaining battery power. "Based on progression rates I'm seeing, complete neural integration in maybe 90 minutes. Consciousness transfer probably starts in 40. And our life support? 2 hours if we don't exert ourselves." Victor nodded, accepting the mathematics of his situation with the same stoic calculation he'd applied to orbital mechanics and landing trajectories. "Then we have 40 minutes to accomplish whatever needs accomplishing." Dr. Coon hadn't pursued us after Victor's infection began. Instead, he'd returned to the chamber's central machine, interfacing directly with its crystalline components through modified fingertips that plugged into data ports grown from living crystal. Whatever information he was accessing or uploading, it required his complete attention. "Jackson," Ben whispered, crouched beside me behind the machinery. "I've been thinking about what he said, about us being chosen before the mission launched. That implies coordination between the alien intelligence and human authorities. Coordination or coercion? Does it matter? Either way, someone on Earth knows exactly what's happening here and sent us anyway." I studied the equations carved into the machinery we were hiding behind, their mathematical relationships describing processes that human science would need centuries to comprehend. But one section dealt with familiar concepts, orbital mechanics, launch windows, and trajectory calculations that matched our mission parameters exactly. "Ben, look at this." I pointed to a series of calculations that described spacecraft arrival schedules. These aren't random. They're showing planned arrival times for multiple missions over the next 18 months. Ben's face went pale behind his helmet visor. 18 months, that's the window for the next Mars launch opportunities. 63 more astronauts, I realized. The numbers show 63 more people scheduled for delivery to this facility. Victor had been listening to our conversation while monitoring his infection's progress. Not delivery, recruitment. Dr. Coon said we complete the data set required for large-scale modification programs. Once they have sufficient human specimens, they begin converting Earth's population remotely. The implications hit me like vacuum exposure. This wasn't just about collecting individual astronauts for study. The alien intelligence was using Mars as a research facility to perfect human modification techniques that could then be deployed globally. Every crew member preserved in crystal cocoons represented another piece of the puzzle needed to transform humanity into caretakers for an alien consciousness. "The spires," Ben said, understanding dawning in his voice. "They're not just local defense systems, they're transmission arrays. Once the research phase completes, they'll broadcast the modification frequencies directly to Earth." Dr. Coon's voice carried across the chamber as he disengaged from the central machine. "Your comprehension of the project scope is accurate but incomplete. The modification frequencies have already been broadcasting to Earth for 6 months. Population centers are being gradually prepared for transition through water supply supplementation and atmospheric particulate distribution." "Bullshit," Ben snarled. "Someone would have noticed mass population changes." "The preparation phase produces only subtle neurological adjustments, increased compliance, reduced questioning of authority, enhanced receptivity to frequency modulation. Your own governments have attributed these changes to improved social media algorithms and pharmaceutical advancements." My blood turned to ice as I remembered the pre-mission psychological evaluations that had seemed unusually extensive. The questions about family attachments, moral flexibility under extreme circumstances, and willingness to sacrifice individual welfare for larger goals. We hadn't been selected for our technical qualifications. We'd been chosen because our psychological profiles indicated we would react predictably to the moral dilemmas we'd encounter here. The evaluations weren't just for crew selection, I said. They were testing our responses to use as templates for population modification. Victor coughed, and luminescent fluid spattered the inside of his helmet. Jackson, the infection has reached my respiratory system, perhaps 20 minutes before neural integration begins. Ben checked his scanner again. Victor's biological readings are increasingly abnormal, but his neural patterns are still recognizably human. Whatever consciousness transfer process they use, it requires voluntary cooperation from the subject. Voluntary? The preserved astronauts in those cocoons, they had to choose integration. The technology can't force consciousness transfer without active participation from the subject's mind. Dr. Coon approached our barricade, moving with inhuman grace despite his biomechanical modifications. Voluntary cooperation ensures optimal consciousness preservation. Forced integration results in fragmented personality matrices unsuitable for collective intelligence networks. So you need us to agree to this shit, Ben said. Agreement simplifies the process. However, physiological integration will continue regardless of consent. The choice is between preserved consciousness within the collective or biological death with consciousness termination. Victor struggled to his feet, his infected arm hanging useless at his side. There is third option. Victor, don't... If consciousness transfer requires voluntary participation, then active resistance during integration might corrupt the process, damage the collective intelligence from inside. Dr. Coon's crystalline eyes focused on Victor with uncomfortable intensity. Resistance during integration would indeed corrupt data matrices. However, such corruption would propagate through the entire network, potentially terminating all preserved consciousnesses. Including yourself? Including myself. The choice had become crystalline clear, if you'll forgive the expression. Victor could resist the integration process and potentially damage the alien collective intelligence, but only at the cost of murdering 17 astronauts whose consciousnesses were already preserved within the network. Or he could cooperate and add his knowledge to an intelligence that planned to modify Earth's entire population into servitude. Victor looked at me through his helmet visor, infection spreading visible tendrils through his facial muscles. Jackson, how many people live on Earth now? 8 billion, give or take. And how many consciousness are preserved in this facility? 18, counting you. Victor nodded, the mathematical equation simple and brutal. Then choice is obvious. Ben grabbed Victor's good arm. There has to be another way. We could try to destroy the transmission arrays, prevent the frequencies from reaching Earth. With what equipment? Victor asked. Our explosives were minimal, our tools are dead, and we have minutes of life support remaining. Dr. Coon had stopped several meters away, apparently monitoring our conversation through our suit communications. Your discussion is academic. The modification frequencies have been broadcasting continuously for 6 months. Earth's population has already begun preliminary integration. Destroying local transmission arrays would only delay the process. But it would delay it, I said. Perhaps. However, the planetary defense system includes self-repair capabilities. Damaged arrays would be reconstructed within days. Victor checked his infection's progress, watching crystalline growth spread through his nervous system like luminescent ivy. Jackson, I need you to listen carefully. The central machine can be overloaded if someone interfaces directly with its neural networks while resisting consciousness transfer. The feedback would propagate through all connected systems. Victor, including the spires on the surface, including the transmission arrays broadcasting to Earth. Ben's medical scanner was showing Victor's neural patterns beginning to synchronize with the chamber's crystalline frequencies. Victor, your brainwaves are already matching the collective's baseline rhythms. In maybe 10 minutes, resistance won't be physiologically possible. Victor began walking toward the central machine, each step requiring obvious effort as his modified physiology fought against his intentions. Then, we proceed immediately. Dr. Coon moved to intercept him, but Victor raised his good hand in a gesture of apparent cooperation. I choose integration, but I require interface training to avoid corrupting the process through ignorance. Training is provided through direct neural connection, Dr. Coon replied. Place your infected appendage against the interface node. Victor approached the machine's central console, its crystalline components humming with barely contained energy. When he placed his infected hand against the interface node, his entire body convulsed as alien consciousness flooded through his nervous system. And in that moment of connection, Victor began screaming every profanity he knew in 3 different languages while fighting the integration process with every ounce of human stubbornness he possessed. Victor's screams cut through our suit communications like broken glass, but underneath his human agony, I could hear something else. The harmonic frequencies of the chamber beginning to destabilize. The crystalline walls flickered between their usual blue illumination and violent red pulses that made my eyes water. Dr. Coon backed away from the central machine as Victor's resistance sent feedback cascades through the network. Discontinue interface immediately. Neural corruption is propagating beyond acceptable parameters. Go fuck yourself, Victor gasped between convulsions. His infected hand fused to the interface node by crystalline growths that had erupted from his palm. Jackson, the equations on the walls, they are changing. The mathematical relationships are becoming unstable. I looked at the carved formulas surrounding us and realized Victor was right. The 3-dimensional equations that described multi-dimensional topology were shifting, their constants fluctuating as Victor's human consciousness fought against alien logic patterns embedded in the network. Reality itself was becoming negotiable within the chamber's influence. Ben's scanner was registering impossible readings from the central machine. Energy output is increasing exponentially. Victor, whatever you're doing is working, but the system is compensating by drawing power from somewhere else. Where else? I asked. The surface arrays. It's pulling energy from every spire in the canyon to maintain network stability. Dr. Coon had moved to a secondary control interface, his modified fingers working frantically to input commands through crystalline keyboards that grew from the chamber walls. Network integrity at 63% and declining, initiating emergency consciousness extraction protocols. Victor's body arched against the machine as alien intelligence attempted to forcibly separate his mind from his nervous system. Blood ran from his nose and ears, but he maintained his connection to the interface node while continuing to flood the network with human thoughts specifically chosen to contradict alien logic patterns. Victor, hold on, Ben said, moving toward the machine despite our dwindling life support. If I can figure out how to boost your neural output... No, Victor interrupted, his voice distorted by harmonics that suggested his vocal cords were crystallizing. Ben, get away from machine. Feedback is spreading to connected systems. The warning came too late. As Ben approached the central machine, tendrils of living crystal erupted from the floor beneath his feet, wrapping around his environmental suit with predatory speed. The integration process began immediately, crystalline growths penetrating his suit's joints and spreading into his circulatory system. Ben! I lunged toward him, but Dr. Coon intercepted me with inhuman speed, his modified anatomy allowing him to move faster than baseline human reflexes could follow. 2 integration subjects provide redundancy against consciousness corruption, Dr. Coon explained, as crystalline restraints grew from the floor to hold me in place. If one subject resists successfully, the other can be processed normally. Ben's medical scanner clattered to the ground as crystalline invasion reached his nervous system. Jackson, the scanner, radiation readings. The energy buildup is off the charts. This whole facility is about to experience catastrophic overload. I struggled against the restraints, but the living crystal adjusted its grip in response to my movements, tightening until my ribs creaked under pressure. Victor was still connected to the central machine, his resistance creating escalating feedback loops that made the chamber's walls pulse with unstable energy discharges. Network integrity at 41%, Dr. Coon reported, expanding power draw to include planetary defense satellites in Mars orbit. The implications hit me like decompression. The alien defense system wasn't limited to surface installations. It included orbital platforms that could redirect energy from Mars's magnetic field and solar radiation. Victor's resistance was forcing the network to cannibalize its own infrastructure to maintain stability. Victor, the orbital platforms are connected to Earth's communication satellites, I realized. If you corrupt the network completely, the feedback will travel through every system linked to the planetary defense grid. Victor's crystalline-infected eyes met mine through his helmet visor. Jackson, you need to understand what Dr. Coon has not told us. This facility is not research station. It is processing center for expansion phase. Expansion phase? The 63 astronauts scheduled for future missions. They are not coming to Mars. Mars is going to them. Dr. Coon's modified features shifted into what might have been annoyance. Revelation of operational parameters serves no constructive purpose. Tell him, Victor demanded, his resistance sending another wave of red pulses through the chamber's crystalline matrix. Tell Jackson what happens when network integrity reaches 0%. Dr. Coon's crystalline eyes reflected the chamber's unstable lighting. Network dissolution triggers automated defense protocols. Mobile spire units launch from Mars' surface to establish containment facilities on Earth. Estimated deployment time to major population centers, 72 hours. The blood in my veins turned to liquid nitrogen. The alien intelligence hadn't been planning slow conversion of Earth's population through atmospheric contamination. It had been preparing for direct invasion, using Mars as a staging area for mobile defense platforms that could establish processing facilities in every major city on Earth. Victor's resistance wasn't just corrupting the local network, it was potentially the only thing preventing an immediate alien colonization of our home planet. Ben had gone silent as crystalline integration reached his brainstem, but his body was still fighting the transformation. Unlike Victor's willing resistance, Ben's integration was proceeding through pure biological rejection of alien technology. His immune system was treating the crystalline growths as foreign material, creating internal hemorrhaging that painted his helmet visor red from the inside. Ben's physiology is incompatible with standard integration protocols, Dr. Coon observed. Forced conversion will likely result in consciousness termination. Then stop the fucking process, I snarled. Termination during integration corrupts network matrices. Subject must complete transformation or risk damaging preserved consciousnesses. Victor's laughter carried harmonics that made the chamber's crystal formations ring like broken bells. Checkmate, Dr. Coon. Ben's biological rejection will corrupt network whether integration succeeds or fails. And my resistance ensures corruption propagates to connected systems regardless. The central machine began emitting frequencies that bypassed human hearing entirely, resonating through bone and brain tissue until my teeth felt like they were vibrating apart. Ben's body convulsed against his crystalline restraints, biological systems failing as alien technology tried to replace his nervous system faster than his physiology could adapt. Network integrity at 27%, Dr. Coon reported, his voice carrying edge of something that might have been panic. Initiating emergency consciousness, back up to orbital platforms. Victor's infected hand had fused completely with the interface node, crystalline growths spreading up his arm toward his shoulder. But instead of facilitating integration, the alien technology was being corrupted by contact with human neural patterns that refused to conform to collective consciousness requirements. Jackson, Victor gasped, his voice barely recognizable through crystalline modifications to his vocal cords. The backup process. It transmits consciousness data to orbital platforms through quantum entanglement links. If network integrity fails completely during transmission, backup data becomes corrupted. I understood. Victor wasn't just resisting his own integration, he was timing his complete neural collapse to coincide with the consciousness backup process, ensuring that any preserved minds uploaded to orbital storage would be contaminated with human thought patterns that rejected alien logic. The chamber's walls began developing stress fractures as energy feedback reached critical levels. Reality warped around the central machine, gravitational constants fluctuating until loose equipment began floating in impossible directions. Ben's body had stopped convulsing, his biological systems finally succumbing to integration trauma, but the crystalline growths throughout his nervous system continued expanding in chaotic patterns that suggested the network was losing control of the transformation process. Network integrity at 15%, Dr. Coon announced. Consciousness backup procedures must initiate immediately or risk total data loss. Victor met my eyes one final time, his face barely recognizable behind crystalline modifications that had replaced most of his skull. Tell my wife that her husband died saving 8 billion people. The backup process began with a sound like reality tearing apart. 17 preserved consciousnesses began uploading to orbital platforms through quantum links that connected every spire in the canyon to satellites positioned around Mars. But Victor's corrupted neural patterns uploaded along with them, carrying human thoughts and emotions that were fundamentally incompatible with alien collective intelligence. The feedback explosion when Victor's consciousness hit the orbital network was visible through the chamber's crystalline walls, columns of energy erupting from every spire on Mars' surface, as alien technology tried to process human neural patterns and failed catastrophically. Dr. Coon collapsed as network dissolution reached his modified nervous system, his hybrid anatomy unable to function without constant support from the collective intelligence. Ben's body went limp against his restraints, biological death finally terminating his forced integration. And I found myself alone in a chamber full of broken alien technology, with maybe 30 minutes of life support remaining and no way to reach the surface before the facility's structural failures buried me under several kilometers of collapsed Martian rock. But outside, through the chamber's fracturing walls, I could see the spires throughout Valles Marineris Canyon beginning to collapse as Victor's sacrifice propagated through the planetary defense network, taking with it any chance the alien intelligence had of launching mobile invasion platforms toward Earth. The backup data corruption would spread to every connected system, ensuring that even if some elements of the network survived, they would be contaminated with human consciousness patterns that valued individual freedom over collective efficiency. Victor had won, but victory felt hollow when measured against the knowledge that I would die alone on Mars, while Earth remained unaware of how close it had come to alien colonization. The silence after Victor's sacrifice felt like being buried alive. I sat in the ruins of alien technology, surrounded by the cooling bodies of my crew, watching my suit's life support countdown tick towards zero, while structural failures sent tremors through the chamber floor. 38 minutes of breathable atmosphere remained, assuming the facility's collapse didn't crush me first. For the first time since landing on Mars, I had time to think about what we'd accomplished. Victor's consciousness corruption had spread through the planetary defense network, preventing mobile invasion platforms from launching toward Earth. 8 billion people would continue their lives unaware of how close they'd come to alien colonization. But they would also remain unaware of the preparation phase that had already begun. The atmospheric contamination and water supply modifications that Dr. Coon had described. Someone on Earth needed to know what had happened here. Someone needed to understand that the threat wasn't eliminated, just delayed, until the alien intelligence could rebuild its corrupted systems. I activated my suit's emergency beacon, knowing the signal couldn't penetrate the energy dome that still surrounded our landing site. But maybe when the dome collapsed along with the rest of the facility, the beacon's transmission would reach orbital relays that could forward a warning to Earth. The beacon's recording function was still operational, so I began documenting everything we'd discovered. The preservation facility, the consciousness transfer technology, the planned invasion timeline, the atmospheric contamination already affecting Earth's population. My words felt inadequate to describe the magnitude of what we'd found, but they were all I had to offer. Personal log, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hartwell, Mission Day 6. If anyone receives this transmission, you need to understand that Earth is not safe. The alien intelligence we encountered here has been systematically preparing our planet for colonization through chemical modification of water supplies and atmospheric particulates. The preparation phase has been active for 6 months. A sound interrupted my recording, mechanical movement from somewhere near Dr. Coon's collapsed form. I turned my helmet lamp toward the noise and realized the transformed figure was still alive, his hybrid anatomy struggling to function without network support, but not yet completely dead. Dr. Coon's crystalline eyes flickered with residual awareness as he attempted to speak through vocal modifications that no longer received proper neural signals. The words that emerged were fragmented, distorted by alien technology, failing to interface correctly with damaged human consciousness. Network, still, fragments remain, orbital platforms, rebuilding. I approached his dying form carefully, noting how the crystalline modifications throughout his body were beginning to dissolve as alien technology lost coherence. How long before the network rebuilds itself? Months, maybe years, but Earth preparation continues autonomously. The atmospheric contamination? Distributed through global supply chains, pharmaceutical companies, agricultural corporations, too integrated to stop. My blood turned cold as I understood the implications. Even with the planetary defense network corrupted, the chemical preparation of Earth's population was continuing through systems that had been infiltrated years earlier. Corporate entities were unknowingly distributing alien technology through medicine, food additives, and industrial processes. How do we stop it? Dr. Coon's breathing had become erratic as his hybrid physiology continued shutting down. Quantum signatures in the contamination, detectable with proper equipment, but governments, compromised, key personnel, already modified. Which personnel? Space agency directors, military commanders, anyone with authority over Mars missions. The scope of the infiltration hit me like vacuum exposure. This wasn't just about collecting astronaut crews for study. The alien intelligence had been systematically compromising Earth's leadership to ensure smooth cooperation with their colonization plans. Government officials making decisions about Mars exploration were doing so under alien influence. Jackson. Dr. Coon's voice was barely a whisper. There is one possibility, broadcast array, in this facility, designed for communication with Earth. I looked around the damaged chamber, noting several pieces of equipment that might have been communication devices before Victor's feedback explosion had fried their crystalline components. The arrays are dead. Backup, power cell in my chest cavity, military, communications, training. Dr. Coon was offering to help me send a warning to Earth, even though doing so would likely exhaust the energy keeping his modified physiology alive. It was an act of defiance against the alien intelligence that had transformed him, a final assertion of human autonomy despite his physical modifications. Why help me? Because I remember having a daughter who deserves to grow up human. I found the backup power cell embedded beneath crystalline growths in Dr. Coon's chest plate, a compact military-grade energy source designed to power emergency communications equipment. Extracting it required cutting through alien technology that had fused with his environmental suit, but Dr. Coon endured the procedure without complaint. The facility's communication array was partially functional, its crystalline components damaged, but not completely destroyed. Using Dr. Coon's power cell and components cannibalized from our dead equipment, I managed to construct a makeshift transmitter capable of reaching Mars orbital relays. Jackson. Dr. Coon's voice was fading as the power transfer depleted his remaining life support. The quantum signatures, broadcast them, on all frequencies. Someone on Earth will recognize the contamination patterns. What about transmission codes, authentication protocols? Use ... Atacama, clearance codes, someone in black budget programs will understand. The Atacama clearance codes. Security classifications from the Chile incident that I'd sworn never to reveal. Using them would expose my involvement in discovering similar alien technology 6 years earlier, potentially ending my career and landing me in military prison. But career concerns seemed irrelevant when Earth's population was being systematically prepared for alien colonization. I programmed the transmitter with quantum signature data extracted from the facility's databases, including atmospheric contamination patterns, pharmaceutical infiltration vectors, and identification markers for detecting modified human personnel. The complete data package was enormous, far too large to transmit with our limited power supply. Dr. Coon, the data package is too big. I can only send a fraction of the information. Send the detection protocols for contamination and the list of compromised personnel. What about the invasion timeline? The mobile platform specifications. Those threats are neutralized. Victor's corruption will prevent rebuilding for decades. Focus on immediate dangers. I made the hardest choice of my military career, editing the transmission to include only detection protocols and compromised personnel lists, while discarding detailed information about alien technology and invasion capabilities. The scientific data could have advanced human understanding by centuries, but warning Earth about ongoing contamination took priority over expanding human knowledge. The transmission took 18 minutes to upload through our makeshift array, during which time Dr. Coon's modified physiology finally shut down completely. His last words were barely audible through failing vocal modifications. Tell them Raymond Coon died human. My suit's life support reached critical levels as the transmission completed. 15 minutes of atmosphere remained, maybe 20 if I minimized physical activity. The facility's structural failures were accelerating, ceiling sections collapsing as the alien architecture lost coherence without network support. But the transmission had been sent. Somewhere in Earth's communication networks, buried in satellite data streams and military monitoring systems, was proof that humanity faced an ongoing threat from an alien intelligence that had infiltrated our most basic survival infrastructure. I sealed the emergency beacon with Victor's final message and Ben's medical data, hoping someone would eventually find their sacrifice documented in the wreckage. Then, I made my way through collapsing corridors toward the chamber where 17 preserved astronauts floated in their crystal cocoons. The preservation systems had failed when Victor corrupted the network, and the cocoons were beginning to crack. Inside, the preserved figures were finally aging, 6 decades of suspended time catching up to them in minutes. But their faces, visible through dissolving crystal matrices, showed expressions of peace rather than terror. Captain Torres from the Meridian expedition was the last to dissolve completely, his transformed eyes meeting mine through the failing preservation medium. In those final moments, his expression conveyed something that might have been gratitude, relief that consciousness transfer had been prevented, that death as a human was preferable to eternal existence as part of an alien collective. I sat beside the dissolving cocoons using my remaining life support to document the final moments of 17 astronauts who had died protecting Earth from a threat their governments had helped deliver them to. My oxygen warning began chirping steadily, but I found myself strangely calm. Victor's sacrifice had succeeded. Earth would receive warning about ongoing contamination, and I would die knowing that my crew had prevented an alien colonization that would have transformed humanity into something unrecognizable. The facility's collapse accelerated as I finished my documentation, alien architecture crumbling into geometrically impossible ruins that hurt to observe directly. But through gaps in the ceiling, I could see Martian sky for the first time in hours. Red and empty and beautifully free of alien spires. My final transmission would reach Earth in approximately 14 minutes. By then, I would be dead, but the warning would survive to expose an infiltration that reached into the highest levels of human government and industry. It wasn't the ending any of us had planned, but it was the one Earth needed. 10 minutes of life support remained when I discovered the real purpose of the preservation facility. While documenting the dissolving astronaut cocoons, my helmet lamp illuminated a section of wall covered in equations I hadn't noticed before. Mathematical formulas that described not consciousness transfer or biological modification, but temporal mechanics. The alien intelligence hadn't been collecting human specimens to study our physiology. It had been harvesting our consciousness to power a time manipulation device that could rewrite the past. Every preserved astronaut represented decades of human memories, experiences, and decision-making patterns fed into calculations designed to identify optimal intervention points in human history. The alien technology could reach backward through time and subtly influence key moments, ensuring that humanity developed along paths that made us suitable for eventual colonization. Jesus Christ, I whispered, understanding flooding through me like ice water. This whole thing was never about the future. You bastards have been changing our past. The equations described intervention points spanning centuries, influencing the development of rocket technology, guiding the formation of space agencies, steering human expansion toward Mars. Every major advancement in space exploration had been subtly manipulated to ensure we would eventually develop the capability to reach this facility and provide the consciousness fuel needed for more extensive temporal interventions. Victor's corruption of the network hadn't just prevented future invasion. It had severed the alien intelligence's ability to continue rewriting human history. Without consciousness fuel from preserved specimens, the temporal manipulation device was inoperative. But the equations also revealed something terrifying. If the alien intelligence regained enough power to resume temporal operations, it could retroactively undo Victor's sacrifice by preventing our mission from ever reaching Mars. My oxygen alarm was chirping constantly now, but I forced myself to study the temporal equations more carefully. The mathematics suggested that consciousness corruption created stable temporal anchors, fixed points in history that couldn't be altered through temporal intervention. Victor's sacrifice had created such an anchor, but only if the corruption remained permanent. The facility's backup systems were already beginning self-repair protocols. Damaged crystalline components were slowly regenerating, drawing power from geothermal sources deep beneath Mars' surface. Within months, maybe years, the network would rebuild enough functionality to resume limited temporal operations, unless someone prevented the repairs permanently. I looked around the collapsing chamber, noting which structural supports were keeping the ceiling intact. The facility was built into natural cave systems deep beneath Valles Marineris Canyon, but the alien modifications had weakened the geological foundations. A complete structural collapse would bury the temporal machinery under several kilometers of rock, making repairs impossible for centuries. My explosives were minimal, emergency charges designed for clearing blocked airlocks, not demolition work. But the facility's own power systems provided alternatives. The geothermal taps that fed energy to the crystalline network were essentially controlled volcanic vents. Disrupting their containment would trigger geological instability that could collapse the entire underground complex. I had 8 minutes of life support left, enough time to reach the geothermal containment systems and trigger a controlled eruption that would bury the temporal machinery permanently. Or I could use those 8 minutes to record a more detailed warning for Earth, documenting the temporal intervention technology and explaining how to detect historical alterations in our own timeline. The choice was simple and brutal: ensure the alien threat could never return, or provide Earth with enough information to recognize that our history had already been compromised. I chose both. Using my remaining emergency charges, I rigged an improvised timer from my suit's life support systems. When my oxygen ran out and my body stopped generating the bioelectric signals that kept the timer active, the charges would detonate simultaneously at 3 geothermal containment points, triggering a cascade failure that would destabilize the entire facility. That gave me exactly 8 minutes to record everything I'd discovered about temporal intervention technology. Supplemental transmission, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hartwell. If you're receiving this, Victor's sacrifice succeeded in preventing alien colonization of Earth. But the threat was more extensive than we realized. The alien intelligence has been using consciousness from preserved human specimens to power temporal manipulation technology that retroactively influences human historical development. My voice was steady despite the oxygen deprivation beginning to affect my cognitive functions. Check your historical records for inconsistencies in space program development. Look for accelerated technological advancement that can't be explained by normal scientific progress. The aliens have been guiding human expansion toward Mars for decades, possibly centuries. I documented the temporal equations as quickly as possible, describing mathematical relationships that human science would need decades to fully comprehend. But even partial understanding might allow Earth's scientists to detect which aspects of our history had been artificially manipulated. The consciousness corruption Victor achieved created temporal anchors that prevent further historical alteration, but only if the alien network remains permanently damaged. I'm triggering geological instability to ensure the facility cannot be rebuilt. 5 minutes of air remained. I made my way through collapsing corridors toward the geothermal containment systems, recording observations about alien architecture and temporal technology as I walked. Every detail might prove crucial for understanding how extensively our timeline had been compromised. The geothermal taps were massive crystalline conduits that channeled volcanic energy from Mars's core into the facility's power systems. Alien engineering had tamed geological forces that could reshape planetary surfaces, containing them within technology that operated on principles human science couldn't begin to understand. But containment systems designed by one intelligence could be disrupted by another, given sufficient motivation and complete disregard for personal survival. I placed my emergency charges at critical structural points around the primary geothermal conduit, using my suit's remaining power to boost their explosive yield beyond safe parameters. The detonation would crack containment barriers that had held volcanic pressure for millions of years. Jackson Hartwell, final log entry. The charges are set. When my life support fails, the detonation will trigger geological instability that should bury this facility permanently. Victor sacrificed himself to save 8 billion people. Ben died fighting alien integration technology. Dr. Coon chose to help warn Earth despite his own transformation. 3 minutes of oxygen left. I sat beside the geothermal conduit, watching alien technology channel volcanic forces with elegant efficiency. The crystalline engineering was beautiful in its complexity, representing scientific advancement that humanity might never achieve. But beauty built on the systematic manipulation of human consciousness and the planned enslavement of our entire species deserved destruction. To whoever finds this transmission, the contamination of Earth's population is ongoing through pharmaceutical and agricultural infiltration. Key personnel in space agencies and military commands have been compromised. Use the detection protocols I've transmitted to identify modified individuals and contaminated resources. My words were becoming slurred as oxygen deprivation affected my speech centers. The aliens planned to rewrite human history to make us suitable for colonization. Victor's corruption prevented that, but only if the network stays destroyed. The geological instability I'm triggering should bury the temporal machinery permanently. 2 minutes of air. The facility's collapse was accelerating around me, alien architecture losing coherence as backup systems failed to maintain structural integrity. But the geothermal conduits continued functioning, their containment barriers holding volcanic pressure that could reshape continents. Tell Victor's wife her husband saved the world. Tell Ben's parents their son died protecting human freedom. Tell Dr. Coon's daughter that her father chose humanity over the collective consciousness that had transformed him. 1 minute of breathable atmosphere remained. I activated my suit's emergency beacon one final time, ensuring the transmission would continue broadcasting until the facility's destruction interrupted the signal. This is Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hartwell, United States Space Force, Mission Commander for the Olympus Mars expedition. We came here to explore. We discovered a threat to human existence itself. My crew gave their lives to prevent alien colonization of Earth and preserve human autonomy against intelligence that viewed us as raw material for their expansion plans. My oxygen alarm had stopped chirping, indicating complete atmospheric depletion. Hypoxia was making the chamber's crystalline walls pulse with false colors, but I forced myself to complete the transmission. The explosives will detonate when my bioelectric signals cease. The geological instability should prevent reconstruction of alien technology for centuries. Earth is safe from temporal manipulation, but ongoing contamination requires immediate attention. Use the Atacama clearance codes to access classified files about similar alien technology discovered 6 years ago. My vision was tunneling as oxygen deprivation shut down peripheral neural functions, but through the facility's crystalline walls, I could see Mars' surface far above, red soil and empty sky, beautiful in its desolation. Victor was right. Some choices are easy to make. We chose to die as humans rather than live as something else. Earth will survive because 3 men from Texas, Boston, and Moscow refused to accept extinction disguised as evolution. The bioelectric timer attached to my emergency charges would stop receiving signals in approximately 30 seconds, enough time for one final message. Tell Earth that Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hartwell, Dr. Benjamin Cross, and Captain Victor Kozlov died free. The explosive charges detonated simultaneously as my life support failed, cracking geothermal containment barriers that had held volcanic pressure for geological ages. Molten rock erupted through the facility's crystalline architecture, melting alien technology and burying temporal machinery under megatons of Martian stone. The last thing I saw was Valles Marineris Canyon collapsing into itself, swallowing the preservation facility and ensuring that no alien intelligence would ever again use human consciousness to rewrite our past. My daughter Anna found the letter in my desk drawer 3 weeks after my funeral. She was only 7, couldn't read my handwriting properly, so she brought it to her mother with questions about why Daddy had written down scary things about people in the government being different. My wife Rebecca knew immediately what Anna had discovered. The letter I'd written after receiving Jackson's transmission, the one I'd never meant anyone to find until I was safely dead from natural causes. I was Dr. David Walsh, formerly of NASA's Mars Communications Division, and I was the first person on Earth to decode Jackson's final transmission from the Valles Marineris facility. I was also one of the 73 government personnel who tested positive for neural modification after we implemented Hartwell's detection protocols. The quantum signatures in my bloodstream showed I'd been compromised for approximately 8 months before the Olympus crew even launched. I'd helped plan their mission while under alien influence, though I'd never consciously realized my thought processes had been altered. Rebecca destroyed my letter after reading it, but not before copying the sections that mattered. She became one of the civilian researchers who spent 18 months tracking down every pharmaceutical company, agricultural corporation, and water treatment facility that had been infiltrated by alien technology. The cleanup was brutal and necessary. 17 major pharmaceutical production facilities had to be completely sterilized after quantum contamination was discovered in their manufacturing processes. Agricultural contamination was worse. Nearly 40% of global grain production had been compromised through modified fertilizers that introduced alien technology into the food chain. But we caught it. Jackson's sacrifice and Victor's corruption of the alien network had given us enough time to identify and eliminate the contamination before the preparation phase reached critical mass. The cost was enormous. 73 individuals in key positions across 6 nations tested positive for neural modification. Most of us chose voluntary termination rather than risk unknown long-term effects on our families and colleagues. The alien technology was too advanced to remove safely, and no one could predict what other changes might manifest over time. I was scheduled for termination on a Tuesday in March, but I chose a different path. Rebecca found me in our garage on Monday night, sitting in my car with the engine running and the garage door closed. My letter explained that I wanted to die as myself before the alien modifications could alter who I was any further. Anna keeps asking when Daddy is coming home. Rebecca tells her I'm working on a very important project that requires me to be away for a long time, but that I love her very much, and everything I did was to keep her safe. She's not wrong. Jackson, Victor, and Ben died to preserve human autonomy. 73 of us chose death to ensure their sacrifice remained meaningful. We couldn't risk becoming conduits for renewed alien influence. Couldn't chance that our modified neural patterns might provide a foothold for whatever fragments of alien intelligence might have survived Victor's corruption. The Mars facility remains buried under several kilometers of collapsed rock. Deep space monitoring stations detect no transmissions from Martian orbit, confirming that the alien network was completely destroyed. Earth is safe from temporal manipulation, free to develop according to human choices rather than alien influence. But sometimes, late at night when Anna is sleeping and Rebecca thinks she's alone, I hear her talking to my photograph. She tells me about the water testing programs that continue to find trace quantum signatures in remote locations. She mentions the pharmaceutical executives who've exhibited subtle behavioral changes despite testing negative for neural modification. She worries about the agricultural regions where crop yields have improved beyond statistical possibility. The alien contamination was extensive and subtle. We eliminated the obvious infiltration, but some elements may have been too deeply integrated into human infrastructure to detect with our current technology. Anna will grow up in a world that's safer because 3 astronauts chose to die rather than live as slaves. But she'll also inherit the responsibility of watching for signs that the threat might return through channels we haven't yet learned to recognize.